Sambatastico.
Usually the show's called Brunch with the CineFiles, but as you can see, it's quite dark out, so either it's 4 in the morning or it's nighttime. So it's dinner with the CineFiles, and we're not taking the brunch thing literally, just figuratively, but we're here with a very special guest, Professor Nick Schlegel.
Schlegel, very good.
Nick Schlegel, sorry. I've had 2 old fashions, and I'm starting to slur my words already. And Nick is a professor working at...
I work both at Wayne State University in Detroit and Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti.
But, so you wrote a book on Spanish horror.
I'm in the process of completing a book on Spanish horror.
Right.
I went to Spain, conducted research in Madrid at the Spanish Filmoteca, interviewed journalists, interviewed key directors like Jorge Grau and Eugenio Martin, who directed Horror Express and The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue.
I love Horror Express. I love Who Would Kill a Child.
And don't forget, George Grau also directed one of our favorites.
Breakfast in Manchester.
It's Breakfast in Manchester Morgue, or The Living Dead in Manchester Morgue, or Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Released in America as Don't Open the Window.
Yes, don't
Eddie's
open the
trying to
window.
get his 2 cents in because he's too focused on doing the food.
Sorry, I'm going to be in and out.
He will
all
be
night.
part of the conversation soon enough, don't worry.
If you look at genre production in Spain from their civil war from 1936 to 1939, afterwards, there's nothing really ideologically subversive. There are no horror films. There are no overtly political films or anything to do with the Cold War that would eventually come along. It's mainly just girls, comedies, light fare. Francisco Franco, the military dictator, the despot in Spain, had a very tightly controlled cinema apparatus and instituted a board of censorship, which was staffed by civil servants and Catholic priests. So it was very, very, very strict. 40 million Catholics. They were very strict about it.
And during what period of Spain's history was this going on?
Well, the 40s were the years of what they called the Años de Hambre in Spain, the years of hunger, because Franco instituted an autarky. He closed Spain down, and Spain's a very Western European country. And he's closed it down and was not asking. Basically, an autarky is when you close your system down. You don't trade. It's sort of like a self-imposed embargo, really. And that really sank Spain into a deep economic misery.
So basically, they were doing it's what happened to Cuba after Castro.
It's
happened to them,
same
but it was, instead of it being imposed on them, they chose to
Self-imposed, absolutely.
Self-imposed.
The 50s change, everything changes. Franco starts to leverage tourism. Tourism becomes a major cash cow. Tourism means importing foreign culture, obviously. If you're going to be bringing in people, tourists bring in their culture with them. And he decided to sort of cinematically shake hands with the United States and let Eisenhower build military bases in Spain. And then a guy named Samuel Bronston, a very famous producer, his unit came into Madrid and they started making epics like El Cid, for example, the Charlton Heston film. And they trained, they provided a tremendous amount of training in Spain for a workforce, became quick, efficient, very technically proficient, international casts, international co-productions. But it wasn't until the late 1960s when the Spanish government pulled out a stamp and said, okay, you may now make horror films.
So was when Nashi did his first quote-unquote horror film? Because for those, if you're a diehard film geek, you know who Paul Nashi is. Not a lot of people know who Paul Nashi is.
The Spanish Wolfman, I call him.
He was like the Spanish Vincent Price in a weird kind of way.
You couldn't put it better.
But was his first film a Spain-backed film, or was he making films prior to when he did his first werewolf film?
Yeah, he had been smaller parts. He was a weightlifter. He had a physique, and so he was cast. Kind of like typecast.
He also had a very impressive toupee.
Very impressive toupee. Yes,
very impressive.
Yeah. I mean, Paul was
almost John Saxon.
Pretty charismatic. Yes, he is a sort of like the Spanish doppelganger for John Saxon with the 5 o'clock shadow and the brooding eyes. And
I think of Paul Nashi as kind of like the horror version of Arnold Schwarzenegger, since he was a bodybuilder, and they both used their fame.
Schwarzenegger meets Vincent Price, the sort of cinematic, spackle.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but Eddie, because you're a big Grindhouse, 42nd Street guy, somewhat of a cult movie expert. Are you a fan of Paul Nashi's stuff?
The stuff that I've seen, Spanish horror has never been my strong point. Unfortunately, the most famous of all the Spanish directors is probably my least favorite director in history, which is the guy by the name of Jess Franco, who I call him Mr. Roofless and Toothless. Well, he's dead now.
I think it's fascinating that you're not a Jess Franco fan.
Jess, not Jesse. Jess.
Well, there's Jesu, Jesus,
Jesus, a lot of different
Jesus.
Things. Jess Frank.
Well,
Jess Frank.
any man. One of my problems with Jess Franco is that, as I know Nick will talk about it, is that he went to work with one of I think the greatest directors of all time, Orson Welles, and this man, who I think is the worst director, went and probably edited the greatest director's film, Don Quixote.
Yes. But what fascinates me as a fan and a historian and a scholar is the fact that Jess was capable of some really high art at times, but he also walked that very low plane of culture as well. So you have this like conflation of high art and low art mixed together, which created, and the timing was just perfect, the 60s, right? So it's like the pot is just overflowing with this like cinematic broth. When United Artists formed, you know, Pickford and Fairbanks and Chaplin, they said that the lunatics have been put in charge of the asylum, was the, you know, on Variety, right? Well, that's kind of what happened in Spain. They made so many horror films, it was like the lunatics were put in charge of the asylum. And my theory is that this is all basically a result of the Spanish Civil War, in which nearly 1 million people died. And they were sort of like, didn't have the time to sort of cathartically grapple with the bone pile of a million people. And civil wars are always, you know, very, very difficult to sit through. That, I mean, that type of anxiety and post-war malaise has to go somewhere.
Right.
And I felt it was repressed at a sort of like a national level, and then boom, went right into the horror films.
It's like, you know, some of the best horror films came out of America because of our Puritan kind of like take on things.
Absolutely.
We're trying to get it out.
Yes, like Witchfinder General and stuff like that.
Right,
yes,
Witchfinder.
yes.
Well, that was British.
Yes. Oh, good point. Yes, but
Sorry.
good point.
British.
But sort of like the
Right,
idea,
I'll
like,
tell you what,
But I love that
ass.
film. I'm a
Conquer
big
Worm.
fan of
Conquer Worm.
Conquer Worm with Friday
residual
title.
Puritan.
but it's an
yeah.
awesome movie. But it's not Spanish.
My biggest problem with Jess Franco is the man directs so many films and most of them are out of focus and he claims they're an aesthetic choice. Like Eugenie Desaad, there are scenes in there that, my God, that are, it changes from shot to shot, and people who are fans of his, or they're so loyal, they're willing to accept anything he says. That's what I'm sick of, because the people that love Franco are fucking
That's
nuts.
like a really small fan base.
Oh, no, it's not.
Really?
No.
It's big?
You know,
He has a very loyal.
When you ran AV Maniacs, right? Did you
Yes.
have a lot of like people defending Franco?
Yes.
really?
Yes.
I was going to defend him. I could try and explain it and say something like, well, you know, he wasn't using video assist, even though it existed. And he probably, you know, was shooting on such a tight budget that the focus puller might have been, you know, like underage labor or something like that. Or
Right.
maybe he didn't even have a focus puller and was doing it himself. Of course, he's a Zoom fanatic anyhow. I mean,
He gets his
Franco
like
loves his
sister's
Zoom.
nephew to
Exactly.
do the focus pulling.
Shrimp.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow, that looks fantastic.
Hot off the grill.
Oh, that's good. Well
That's
done,
delicious.
That is fantastic.
The marinade is really good, man.
I'll give you the recipe.
Well done.
Thank you. All right, I'll tell you a director that I really like. George Grau, who we talked about earlier, who I think did one of the best films of the 70s in terms of horror. It's The Living Dead in Manchester Morgue,
yeah.
which is an English-Spanish co-production, but it's really oozed in Spanish
It's also
feel.
known as Let Sleeping Dogs
Let
Lie.
Corpses Lie.
Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Sorry, I even got it wrong when I tried to correct it.
Dude,
I'm an
and
idiot.
and let me tell you the title.
I'm
Okay.
telling you, it's the old fashioned. Eddie, where's your old fashioned?
We'll
Bring
find
it out,
it.
man.
I know, man.
We gotta go
This
back.
is
I made old fashions.
knocking me on my ass.
All right, so to Spanish
I'm too-
language horror films.
Yes.
Oh God,
They are
I'm
fascinating.
afraid. I'm a pussy. I'm afraid to drink this, man.
Oh, come on. You can do it.
All right,
Cheers, Jen. Cheers.
I'm trying this for you guys.
Sambatastico.
There's many different ways to make an old fashioned. We're going to do it the traditional way. First of all, what's very important is you need an orange. You need some bourbon or rye. I prefer bourbon. You can use rye. Traditionally, old fashions are made with rye. I prefer bourbon. You need bitters. Now, this is Peychaud's bitters. You can use whatever's on the market, just standard bitters. And normally, when you make an old fashioned, the proper way to do that is that you put a sugar cube in there and you would muddle it. Well, we're in Eddie's place. He doesn't have the proper cocktail utensils, so we're going to go with some raw sugar today. I prefer raw sugar to the usual store-bought stuff because it has more of a mapley taste to it. Now, first thing you want to do is you want to take about a tablespoon of sugar. This isn't really a tablespoon, but this is what was accessible to me. And just put it in there like that. A couple of dashes of bitter. With your orange, you cut it in half. And you just squeeze the orange juice into the bitter sugar mixture. Now, normally when you do an old fashioned, you're working with the sugar bitter mixture. You put in like a tablespoon of water or something that creates a simple syrup. I like pouring the orange juice in there because it gives it more of an orangey flavor. Since we don't have a muddler, you can just mix it. Get your ice. Put a bunch in there. Now, this is the thing. What I prefer is what a lot of bars do. When you make an old-fashioned, you want to use a particular shaped ice cube that's like a perfect cube. It's usually large. You can also get these trays that are like orb-shaped cubes. But the point is that you want the single large cube because it melts slowly. It dilutes the drink slowly. It makes it taste better as you get back to the get down to the bottom of the drink. Now, what you want is around 2 drams, which is more or less 2 shots. We're going to use the top of his cocktail container, or you could just use a shot glass. A shot glass is fine. We pour it up to the brim. 1, 2, and you mix. Garnish. Garnish is very important. You take the orange, and I've already pre-cut this, but you want to cut off parts of the peel. You want to be very careful how you do this. If you look at how I've cut these, you barely see any white. That's important. You want just the zest part. You don't want the white. And I'm going to do a little trick, which you don't have to do, but it's key to me anyways. You want to take a lighter, and you want to light the peel. And what this does is it loosens up the oils. And you want to do it over your glass. It doesn't have to be too long. You don't want to burn it, and you put it in your glass. And there you have your old-fashioned. Kampai.
I love mine. Jorge Grau's a really wonderful guy.
Woo! I can't do
Spent
that.
time with him in Madrid.
That's fucking paint thinner.
Living Dead in Manchester Morgue is consistently one of those titles that sort of like makes it into the top 5 zombie films of all time because, as you said, it's exquisitely shot in northern England locations. It's handled differently. It's a different sensibility that's brought to it.
Why England? Like why?
The producers wanted Manchester in the title. They didn't shoot it in
Was
Manchester.
it a UK co-production?
Yes.
Was that
yes.
what?
I
was a
believe
UK
it was.
yeah.
I'd have to double check.
And it's
on
actually
this.
a UK
Italian, Spanish.
Yeah, that's why you have
Okay.
one of the great
Multinational.
Italian
Ray Lovelock.
Ray Lovelock, who's very good as, even though
So well dubbed.
It's well dubbed, but his accent's a little too limey, but it works.
Oh, I didn't mean the accent itself. You're right. No, I meant in just in the
Yeah, they
dubbing
did a
of the
good job.
synchronization is nicely done. Most people don't even realize it's dubbed film.
And it has very memorable sequences. In
Arthur
fact,
Kennedy's not dubbed.
No, he's not. He does
That's
himself.
a terrible Irish accent.
Yeah,
it's
well-
like there are Americans who are uncomfortable doing British accents, so they do Irish accents.
When he's trying, the dead are rising in their coffins, and he's trapped down there, and he's trying to get out through that little window.
Right.
And he explained to me that when he was a young boy in school in Barcelona, that the nuns would tell him if you misbehave, the demons will come and drag you to hell. Basically pull you by your legs down to hell. And that image stayed in his mind forever. And of course, when he had the opportunity to do a horror film, he sort of found a way to put it in there. Not to mention he'd also gone and done a tremendous amount of photography and sketching of cadavers at hospitals who died in all sorts of horrible accidents, And so he brought that artistic sensibility to it and gave each victim a backstory, the automobile, the guy, the head wound guy. And so
You brought up a very interesting point. Now let's elaborate on that. As we know, Spain is a very, I think not predominantly, it is a Catholic country. So of course, Catholic guilt and Catholic faith play a very big part in the films. In fact, there's a lot of religious overtones to Let Sleeping Corpses Lie that I think are very, quite beautiful. I mean, the scene is in the church.
Yeah, oh yeah.
The Pete Townsend looking like zombie.
Yeah, it's a very well shot film.
Yeah.
I mean, objectively, if we look at the film, there's some cheesy stuff in there.
But you have to have that for the B
But
characters.
it's a very well shot film. There's some really good ideas in there. I like the whole environmental, aspect to it.
Sure.
But what I want to ask you is, because Eddie introduced me to this film, and it blew me away.
Thank you, by the way.
Blew me away.
Sure.
Who Could Kill a Child?
Oh yeah. You might almost call it an anti-tourism subgenre that you see emerge in the mid-70s in Spain with films like Una Bella para el Diablo, A Candle for the Devil, which is also, it's Eugenio Martin, the guy who did Horror Express. I became unhinged. My jaw dropped during the fetus aborting the mother scene. Absolutely was sort of like Cronenberg, long before Cronenberg ever picked up a camera, and I thought, I kind of just checked out mentally when I saw that, the blood running down her leg, and she's saying, the baby's killing me.
This is one of those
It's like,
films
what
where you
the
like
fuck
watching,
is
you're like,
going
oh,
on?
they're not going to go there.
And they go, my
And
God, did they go there?
It's there are film fans who know about this film, And now they may know about it a little bit more because it's been remade. I hear the remake's not that great.
Why would you?
But-
Why don't see the original? Fuck the remake.
But the original, it's one of these films that's like this pleasant surprise because it's a foreign language film, but it doesn't feel like it's dubbed. like the cast, the main couple are British. They're not dubbed.
Well, that's the most brilliant part of the film is
Right.
that it's a Spanish film, but you're seeing it through the eyes of a British
Some
tourist.
characters are dubbed, but they're not dubbed, so you don't have that like mit-out sound feel to
Nice.
it that
Nice
was
there,
like
yeah.
famous with like Spanish language and Italian language film.
It brings the
and the photography is phenomenal.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
beautiful.
very
Cinerador.
sunny movie.
Oh.
In some ways, I would compare the look to like The Wicker Man, the original Wicker
Great
Man, not the Nick
comparison.
Cage remake.
bullshit. Yeah.
But it's the most fucked up, disturbing, but brilliant concept.
His name's actually Narciso Ibanez Serrador. His first foray into the genre really was a film called, in English it's called The House That Screamed.
Yes, I.
Oh, you know this film.
The Finishing
Yes.
School.
Yeah, Lily Palmer. La
It's a
La
flawed
Residencia.
movie,
Yeah.
but it's so fascinating.
I find it to be like Argento before Argento.
Yes.
I think like there are certain killing
and
sequences
we had,
in slow motion.
we had a famous episode, or rather infamous episode on Argento.
Infamous. This is infamous.
Which
now.
yes, this is infamous, which will appear on thisisinfamous.com.
Oh, thank you.
Where I knocked Argento harshly, but it was just the films we discussed on that episode that I had a problem with. I actually admire. Sorry, I got a mushroom in my mouth. That's very hot.
Mush mouth.
Mush mouth. I actually admire Argento a great deal, and yes, The House That Screamed is very much an Argento-like thrill, a giallo before there was giallos.
The Spanish
but
giallo.
it's very. I wouldn't say atmospheric. It's like the best
Very,
way. I
yeah.
know it's like a cliche term,
But no, it is. And
and it makes no sense.
No,
But what I
well,
love
mean-
about the film, this is what I love about the film.
Don't
is
spoil
that-
it for people, by the
No,
way.
I'm not
Right,
spoiling
okay.
anything.
No spoilers.
I don't know if you can spoil a film because it just keeps switching gears every 5 or 10 minutes. But the thing is that what I love about the film is that you change your allegiance. You think you
All
have
the
a character
time.
up as the heroine, and you
but
follow that
Agatha
character, and if something
Christie, yes.
happens,
Well
and you
done.
like have to find a new heroine or protagonist, and you keep changing your allegiance. It's a fascinating movie. In it.
The original version of the film was released here in America by my favorite studio of all time, which was AIP, American International Pictures. It was trimmed somewhat
Great
because
poster.
it's pretty graphic for the time. And it's a very well-made movie. It's worth seeking out. It is available through bootleg, actually a pretty good bootleg if it's out there. But sadly, because of rights issues, it has not been released in a nice version.
Horror Express.
Would be my other choice of best Spanish
Because this is
film.
my only opportunity to talk about this on this show.
Oh, you
Horror
got it.
Express.
No,
okay,
it's
so
not.
as a little kid, with my brother, I watched that. I was 5 or 6 years old on WKBD UHF in Detroit, and it's just like cinematic butter for me. It takes me back to a very happy time. It's Peter Cushing. It's Christopher Lee.
They would show that on PBS late at night.
Well, you know why they would show this on PBS? I can tell you why.
Oh, please.
Because back in the 1970s,
Oh, by the way, I switched up from old fashioned to a Kirin. Kirin
Japanese beer.
beer. Kirin beer.
Okay, and I also have you a,
Konnichiwa.
and also a product
Konnichiwa.
placement. Blue
Kanpai.
Moon here for you for later. Okay, it's because back in the 70s, a lot of films they would forget to copyright them, and they would fall into public domain. So for many years, it was not readily available. And thankfully, my friend Mr. David Gregory recently just released it on Blu-ray and my
Severin
special
Films.
edition, Severin. So check it out. It is a very well-made film. It is the best of Spanish meets UK horror because you have Christopher Lee. You will also have Peter Cushing, who I think is my favorite British horror actor, and of course Telly Savalas in a weird whacked-out role.
Completely out of nowhere.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
the-
as a
the
He's
Russian.
barely
Russian
in the
Cossack,
film.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's like a Quatermass film that's not a Quatermass film.
Exactly. It's a fascinating film. It's another film I write about tremendously, and I devote a lot of attention to that film too, for the reasons we talked about. I mean, it's a very interesting sort of espionage train film with horror elements, supernatural thrown in,
And it's
it's-
kind of a surprisingly thought-provoking sci-fi concept.
Yes,
behind
the
it.
idea. I mean, there's so much going on there. I mean, I actually spent I can't get into it, but I spent a lot of time analyzing that film and what's going on, and I tie it to the larger general zeitgeist of what was going on in Spain at that time, with brainwashing and military, despotism and things like that, and taking away freedom of thought to think for yourself. But yes, then there is this sort of like alien aspect of it that's brought into it, rather than the
It has a good sense of humor as well.
It's the
Yes.
old-fashioned. I'm telling you. That's
Yeah,
why
it's
you're
the old-fashioned
like,
tying my
stumbling
tongue
here.
up a little
Old-fashioned?
bit.
Stumbling his words.
Old-fashioned?
Old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned.
Here and
I'm not
beer.
going to drink.
I'm a big fan of Eugenio Martin's. Let me do two. Eugenio Martin's Una Bella para el Diablo, A Candle for the Devil, which is this really twisted little sick Catholic guilt repression film. That I
The
think is
Catholics love their
great.
guilt.
It's a great little film. Kind of hard to get a hold of, but very cool. Secondly, I would say there's this really freaking cool film called The People Who Own the Dark.
Yes, that is
You've heard of it?
yes. I remember you're very excited by that one.
Yes, The People Who Own the Dark is fantastic. I don't want to say much about it. It's sort of like, it's one of those sort of nihilistic post-nuclear war type films.
Okay.
It's kind of like Omega Man based. Really awesome. Paul Naschy. Great cast. Teresa Gimpera is in it. It's just a sick little film. It's like Eyes Wide Shut meets the Omega Man.
I'm surprised we haven't talked about probably the most successful horror series from Spain into America, which would be the Blind Dead film.
Yeah, the Blind Dead.
sure.
I want to ask you about that because I've seen
I
a
read a
couple
lot about
of them.
that too.
They're terrible.
Oh, I don't like them.
Oh, they're
They have I guess they have a lot of atmosphere, but they're really
and they
dull.
don't deliver the goods. Okay, because this is the thing. It's like when I watch a film, like okay, it's shoddily shot, it's cheesy plotting, blah. But at least show me some nudity and some gore. And they don't even deliver on that. I mean, it's like I watch these films, I'm like, what is the point?
De Osorio's, the Blind Dead Quartet. I'm a big fan of the first two, and then I think they get progressively inferior. But
The Templars are phenomenal characters.
concept-wise,
Yeah.
yes.
Concept-wise,
Concept,
It's
but-
genius to have, undead Knights Templar sort of raping and pillaging the landscape.
But just that lax pace that really destroys it for me. It's very drawn out.
I find the pace to be perfectly fine in the first two. It's in the third and fourth films. Where
Well,
I
they're
have-
like slasher films before they were slasher
Yeah,
films.
yeah,
It just
well,
happen to have
they're-
undead people doing all
Well,
the
there's
killing.
like this herd mentality that's going on here. They've been blinded, so they sort of like collectively put together a sonar and seek
Yeah, they
you
seem to
out.
function
They're
pretty
like
well
bats.
for
They're like
blind
bats,
zombies.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things. I mean, to take an Iberian icon like the Templars and resurrect them and have them do all these sort of like heinous deeds. When I analyze the first film, I really talk about the fact that a progressive young sort of like 1970s girl goes to Bersano, which is where they're entombed, and she brings her radio, and she's got her smokes, and she's got all her stuff, and her progressive attitudes. She's just been shown to have had a lesbian tryst with an old friend. She jumps off the train, and she brings all these progressive attitudes with her into this thing. And it's like the undead rise up to sort of like stamp down. And,
But it's so funny that you mentioned that now reminds me of one of Eric's favorite films of all time. And I think I'm not making a joke, it is, which would be Black Sabbath with the
Yes, I love
telephone.
Black
Oh yeah,
Sabbath.
sure. I love Black Sabbath.
In fact, because the lesbian one has the lesbian affair, and of course, then
The uncut one.
the uncut
Cut
one.
one.
yeah,
The
yeah.
cut
Of course,
one makes
yes.
no sense.
Because they obviously, we
And
couldn't
the
talk
order
about
of the
lesbian.
stories is all,
Yeah.
it's,
The scary stories a lot, but either way, but
We've been talking a lot about like late 1960s, early 70s Spanish language horror films without the recent crop of Spanish horror films, because there's been a lot.
The resurgence started in the 80s, mid to late 80s with like Brian Yuzna coming, moving to Spain, setting up shop in Barcelona with Fantastic Factory and doing some interesting stuff. Killer Tongue is one of my favorites. I love that film. But it was also gathered a lot of momentum with people like Guillermo del Toro doing Mexican and Spanish
Co-production,
co-productions
yeah.
and bringing in some U.S. money and distribution as well.
Is he
Devil's
technically
Backbone,
is he
for
a
example.
Mexican? Because he does a lot of Spanish-themed movies,
Yes.
but he's a Mexican director.
He's a Mexican director who grew up biculturally. He had a foot both in Spain and in Mexico, which accounts for.
And
So his productions
His-
were technically Spanish productions or Mexican productions?
they were
I'm just asking
well,
because
no,
I
well,
don't-
originally
It depended on the production.
Del Toro was originally based in Mexico, but then as he was making his films, he would look for co-production so he could get more resources. And of course, Spain being probably one of the wealthiest Spanish of countries, speaking language countries, they would make co-productions. One of them would be Devil's Backbone.
Yeah.
Another one I think is
Which is
a
all
very
about the Spanish Civil War.
a very good one too is the Orphanage.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Yeah, Orphanage is decent. I'm not a
And
big
of course,
fan of it.
It's well made. It has big potholes.
and then the Wreck, the Wreck
Well,
trilogy
Wreck,
has really
first Wreck,
exploded.
I consider one of the best horror films in the last
Fantastic.
15 years.
Really fantastic
Amazing.
film. I'm not a huge fan of the English language remakes.
How long were you in Spain? I mean, how long did you...
For that trip,
Yeah, for this whole project.
okay. my love affair with Spain, with Spanish cinema, but Spain just begins as a little kid. My grandfather, we had an apartment in Las Palmas, which are the Canary Islands off the coast of Morocco, which belonged to Spain. And as a child, I would travel to Spain. My grandfather would do a lot of business in Europe, but we had this sort of like retreat we would go to. So I was actually speaking Spanish before I was speaking English with all these massive trips. And then we kept going as a teenager and as an adult. And when I was doing my PhD, I wanted to marry my passion of Spain to my profession. And then that's basically how the whole Spanish horror thing began. How can I earn a living going to Spain and having fun? And of course, that was the answer. How it was brokered basically was I got in touch with the sort of eminent scholar on the subject in the world, and his name's Carlos Aguilar, who I befriended, and we became quite close, and we're still very close to this day. And he brokered everything for me via email. His wife Anita Haas, who's from Toronto and also a journalist and historian, are this tremendous tag team in cinematic history, and they brokered the interviews. They know everybody in the business. And so he just set it up. And I also set up a lot of stuff with the Spanish Filmoteca, which is an arm of the Spanish government, the Ministry of Culture.
How long were you there for? I mean,
on that trip, it was supposed to be 2 weeks, but it was just 8 days.
Okay.
I wish it had been longer. I need to go back and do like the second volume.
When you research the process, obviously the book hasn't been published yet. What's your working title for this?
It's Sex, Sadism in Spain. So the title is actually Sex, Sadism in Spain, and then of course the sub-graphic underneath that is the Spanish horror film 1968 to 1977. I focus on those 10 years, but the book also has a critical filmography at the end that gives analysis to every, like a Fab Press book. There's a filmography at the end with entries on every film.
We share a mutual friend. In fact, he was a guest on our show not too long ago, Mr. Mike White, who hosts Production Booth. Great podcast, great guy. And why don't you tell us about your podcast?
Yeah, Mike's a tremendous guy. Projection Booth's a lot of fun. He's going to have me on in the fall as a guest. I look forward to that.
What show is that going to be?
Who Can Kill a Child?
Who Can Kill a Child? There you go.
Yeah, Who Can Kill a Child?
And you were on something recently about classic noir.
Yes, that's our podcast. It's called That's a Wrap. That's a Wrap is the name of the podcast.
How would we get there?
It's that'sarapshow.com. There's a Facebook page, That's a Wrap. It's me and 2 other PhDs, and we don't sit there and talk, to the point of where everything's going to be brittle and overanalyzed and over-massaged. We're just fans talking about films, but we try and, just have an intelligent discourse like we've been doing tonight.
Guys, this is a doctor. He's a doctor.
Can you check my prostate?
He's a doctor.
Well, you got the gloves.
Doctor of film. That's awesome. Anyway, so we're getting hungry as hell.
Yeah, it's about time.
We got ribs, we got steak, all this stuff. We were kind of like flummoxed with our Iron Man show when we were rained out. So now we can finally eat the stuff that Eddie's made. I can tell you what I sampled so far is delicious. We had old fashions, even though I drank 2 of them already. Now I'm just stuck to Kieran beer.
Well, you also have a Blue Moon here. Here you go, Blue Moon.
And I got a Blue Moon. Hey, look at this. I'm such an alcoholic. But anyways, thank you, Nick, for being on the show. And he teaches in Michigan, which is where I was born. I was born in Detroit.
Here.
He's not far from that.
Take them to Detroit.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyway, so thank you, Nick, for being here.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
I hope you enjoyed your old fashioned.
Eddie,
did you enjoy your old fashioned?
No, I did not.
Look at that. He hasn't even touched it.
I had a sip.